Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world where your breath freezes mid-air and the idea of central heating would sound like a devil's magic. You're not wrapped in fleece or sipping herbal tea. Nope. Tonight, you wake up inside a crooked wooden cottage in the heart of the medieval cold snap. Your nose is already numb. The frost has climbed up your chamber pot. And, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments so we know who else is braving this chill with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and your eyelashes crackle. Not from sleep, but from ice. A thin shell has crept over your lashes in the night, and your nose feels like it's disappeared completely. You don't leap out of bed. You don't even move. You lie perfectly still, wrapped in a stiff wool blanket over straw-stuffed linen that smells like goats and something slightly worse. The bed's shared, probably with 2 or 3 others, because body heat is your only ally against the cruel night, and modesty is about as useful here as a popsicle in hell. Your breath fogs visibly as you exhale. The rafters above are crusted with frost. This isn't a freak weather spell, it's just Tuesday. Outside, the wind howls through the cracks in your timber walls, like some vengeful ghost resentful of your marginally better situation inside. There's no insulation, no glass windows, and definitely no thermostat. The shutters are wooden and warped. They do about as much good as a prayer written on a snowflake. You try to wiggle your fingers. Still attached? That's good. No visible blackened tips. Yet. Toes. Same test. It's important to check each morning. The cold can chew off extremities while you sleep, quietly and without drama. You finally muster the courage to throw off the blanket. The air stabs at your skin like 1,000 invisible needles. A shiver rattles your bones like a haunted xylophone. You're up. The day has begun. The floor is dirt. Solid, frozen dirt. No rugs here. The richest man in town might have a bear pelt, but you're lucky if your calloused heels don't crack when they hit the icy ground. You slip into your house shoes, which are really just stiff leather wrappings, and stumble toward the hearth, which hasn't been lit yet. It's cold as a crypt. This is the heart of winter during the so-called Little Ice Age, a period from the 14th to the 19th century where temperatures dipped just enough to make life miserable and harvests unpredictable. Historians still argue whether it was global volcanic activity, solar cycles, or just Earth being moody again. But the result was the same. Brutal, drawn-out winters, and a population desperately trying to adapt without anything that even vaguely resembled comfort. Your breath clouds before you. There's no mirror, but if there were, you'd see your red, chapped face, hair sticking out like straw from under your linen cap. You're wearing yesterday's tunic, and the day before's. Probably last week's too. No one does laundry in this cold, unless they enjoy breaking their fingers in icy rivers. You pass your younger sibling, curled in a lump near the hearthstone, face peeking out from under a smelly blanket. One eye opens. They don't speak, just grunts. Words are precious energy. You poke at the fire pit. It's out, of course. Last night's embers are dead. You knew that already from the room's temperature, but hope is a powerful drug. Reigniting it will take effort, and kindling you don't have. Wood is scarce. It's been scarce since October. The forests are hours away, and everyone's picked them clean. You pull on a thick woolen overtunic. It's itchy and smells faintly of old mutton, but it traps heat. Supposedly. A leather belt cinches it around your waist, less for style and more to hold up the dagger you use for everything. Cutting, prying, and occasionally reminding the neighbor not to accidentally borrow your firewood again. You step outside. The light is dull. The sun, low and watery behind a haze of gray clouds, barely warms the earth. Snow crunches under your feet, hard-packed and dirty. Smoke rises from nearby rooftops. Those who were lucky or rich enough to start a fire this morning. A crow caws overhead, and you flinch. Not from fear, but superstition. In your village, 3 crows mean death. You see 2? For now. You head toward the well. The bucket rope's frozen stiff. You beat it with a stick until it loosens, then send it down. The water below is icy and slow-moving, reluctant to be disturbed. You fill your pail, hands stiff, and trudge back, sloshing water over your legs. Fantastic. Wet wool and freezing air. Your calves now belong to the elements. At home, the fire still isn't lit. Your mother's working on it. Flint, steel, some hope, and sheer spite. You offer a few twigs you scrounged last night and a piece of last year's dried cow dung. It burns slow and smelly, but hey, heat is heat. By the time the first flicker of orange flames appears, you're already numb. But you sit close anyway, as close as the smoke allows. Your cheeks start to tingle. That's not warmth. That's the sting of blood reluctantly returning to your skin. And it hurts. You huddle in a circle. You sip thin gruel, barley and water with a pinch of salt if you're lucky. The warmth from the bowl helps, and you cradle it like it's holy. Outside, someone coughs, deep and wet. Probably old Marta from 2 doors down. She's been coughing for weeks. That's life during the medieval freeze. Brief windows of warmth surrounded by endless battles with biting air and brittle fingers. And this is just the morning. By mid-morning, the warmth from your fire has surrendered. It never lasts. The wood is too damp, the cow dung too smoky, and your walls leak heat like a bucket riddled with holes. Still, the weak sun has climbed a little higher, casting pale light across your village square. A stretch of slush-pocked dirt lined with low-roofed homes and stooped figures going about their frozen routines. The air smells faintly of smoke, boiled cabbage, and unwashed you step outside again, pulling your cloak tight. It's rough spun, riddled with patches, and offers about as much protection as a wet towel in a snowstorm. But it flaps dramatically when the wind hits, so at least you feel like a frosty medieval superhero. The road is icy. You shuffle, not walk, careful to avoid slipping, unless you want to add concussion to today's list of challenges. You're headed to the common granary, not because you have much hope, but because you have to try. The freeze has ravaged the harvest. Wheat yields are down, rye even worse. The ground froze earlier this year, and the thaw keeps arriving later. Historians still argue whether the famine of 1315 was worse than the one in 1360. But one thing's clear: you are not guaranteed lunch. You reach the granary. It's a squat stone building with a wooden door that creaks like a dying ox. Inside, the air smells of dust and desperation. The steward, a pock-faced man with no patience, eyes your hands. You hold out your bowl. He shakes his head. Nothing today. That's code for nothing for you today. Behind you, someone grumbles. Another says nothing. Just walks away with shoulders hunched and dignity in tatters. Hunger does that. It erodes pride. You turn back, bowl empty, and chew on the inside of your cheek. You've had worse. Maybe you'll have luck hunting later, if the forest gods are in a giving mood. You pass the church on your way home. It's cold, too. Stone holds the chill like a miser hoarding coins. But there's a brazier near the altar, and a few candles burning. You step inside, pretending to pray, but mostly warming your hands. The priest nods from his bench. He knows the game. In times like this, faith runs deeper and stranger. People whisper that the cold is God's punishment for sinful hearts. Others say it's the devil, jealous of earthly joy. One woman swears she saw St. Cuthbert in the frost on her window pane. You're not sure what you believe, but you do know that the weather doesn't care either way. As you sit there, thawing slightly, a child runs in, bundled like a turnip in scarves. "The river's frozen," he shouts. A few heads turn. Not surprising, the river has frozen every winter since you can remember. But still, it means something. It means water can be fetched without risking drowning. It means the fish have vanished beneath a foot of solid ice. It means your only transportation route is now a giant, slippery mystery. But it also means one weird local guy might try skating again with bones tied to his feet. You never miss that. The bells toll noon, one dull, echoing clang for each hour. A few villagers wander in to mumble prayers and beg for warmth. The priest stokes the brazier. You rise. You can't stay here all day. Outside again, the wind has picked up. It slices through your layers like a scythe through wheat. You wrap your arms around yourself and push forward. The snow stings your face. You pass old Willem, hunched and muttering, his beard solid with ice. He's been talking to ghosts since his son died last winter. The cold does that too. It gets into your head, starts making things whisper. Back home, the fire is mostly embers. You feed it a few scraps. Twigs, a twist of dry moss, even a page torn from a ruined book. Literacy loses to hypothermia every time. You pull out your knife and slice a turnip. That's dinner. You boil it in a blackened pot with some leftover broth, a sliver of onion, and a dried herb you can't name. It smells earthy and slightly like foot, but that's comforting in its own way. The pot simmers. The steam fills the small room with a damp kind of hope. Your family sits in a loose circle. Conversation is minimal. Everyone's saving energy. Your sister gnaws a crust of bread like it owes her money. Your father has wrapped his feet in rags and is staring into the flames as though trying to will them bigger. Your youngest sibling just sleeps. That's the best way to endure hunger. Sleep and dream of warm pies that will never come. You all eat in silence. Each bite is a triumph, a sliver of warmth, a delay of starvation. Later, you step outside again. Just for a moment. Just to breathe air that doesn't smell of feet and cabbage. The stars are faint tonight, bare pinpricks beyond a veil of frost-laced sky. The moon is a dull smudge, but it casts enough light to show the outlines of roofs, trees, and frozen livestock pens. You hear an owl. That's rare. They usually vanish south when the cold deepens. Maybe it's lost, or brave, or just as hungry as you. You think of the stories you've heard, of entire villages vanishing in a single storm, of travelers frozen solid mid-step, of babies born blue and never turning pink, but also of miracles. A fish pulled from the ice with a golden scale. A boy who survived a blizzard by hiding in a tree hollow, warmed only by a sleeping fox. You wonder if those tales are true, or just frozen versions of hope. Back inside, you climb into bed. Same straw mattress, same 2 siblings, same scratchy blanket. You position yourself carefully. If someone steals your warmth in their sleep, you'll wake up angry and half frozen. Again. The fire flickers low, casting long, shaky shadows. You shut your eyes. Tomorrow you'll try to snare a rabbit, or trade your carved wooden comb for a bowl of stew, or convince the blacksmith's apprentice to part with a half-burned log. But for now, all you can do is breathe and sleep. If you're lucky. Morning again. But not the soft, golden kind that seeps through shutters with promise. No, this is a hard, gray dawn that slaps you awake with a brittle chill, and the distinct sensation that your nose may have actually frozen off. You open your eyes, squinting at the dim glow from the hearth, only to realize the fire's dead again. Not even a puff of smoke dares to linger. You do the usual wiggle test. Fingers? Number toes? Questionable. You kick your sibling accidentally. He grunts, pulls the blanket tighter, and mumbles something about warm bread. Dreaming again. You kind of hate him for it. You get up because someone has to. The floor is stone, cold, relentless. You move across it like a cautious cat, one that knows the mice have filed for winter eviction, and the cupboard contains nothing but regret. Your breath fogs in front of your face like ghost whispers. You reach the hearth, bend, and poke the ashes. A few embers glow faintly. Small victories. You blow gently. Once, twice. Add a few curls of dry hay and a bit of wood you smuggled from a rotted fence post. It catches, barely. The room blinks awake with the feeblest flicker of firelight. You sit back, rubbing your hands near the flame like you're warming your soul. Maybe you are. The door creaks. Your mother steps out of the bedroom corner, hair bound with a fraying scarf, cheeks red from cold, or maybe just long-standing irritation. She nods. It'll do. That's high praise these days. There's talk around the village that this winter might be the worst yet. Some say it's the work of frost demons. Others blame it on sunspots, tiny, invisible marks on the sky's great lantern that somehow control the crops. Historians still argue whether the sunspot theory has merit, but back then, it all felt like divine mischief. The world had clearly broken something sacred. You step outside with a small pail, and the kind of optimism that's mostly just exhaustion wearing a smile. The well is a 5-minute walk, unless the snowdrifts decide to get ambitious. You trudge. The snow squeaks beneath your boots. Your breath hangs in the air, thick as soup. You pass by your neighbor's hut. Smoke curls lazily from the chimney. A good sign. Means someone's still alive in there. Last winter you found old Marna frozen in her bed. They say she smiled at the end, like she was dreaming of summer fields. Or maybe she just had gas. Hard to tell with Marna. The well is crusted with frost. You lower the bucket carefully, listen for the splash, then haul it up. Water sloshes, biting at your hands as you carry it back. Half of it will go to cooking. The other half might be shared with the goats, who now live closer to the house than your own privacy. Inside again, breakfast is being prepared. That's a strong word for it. More turnip stew, this time thin as rainwater and twice as disappointing. You eat it anyway, because anything warm is a treasure. You lick the spoon. Your sibling eyes you like he might stab you for the last drop. You consider stabbing him first. Then you both laugh. Darkly. The stew brings a little energy back. Enough that you can join the others hauling hay to the barn. What's left of it, anyway? The snow has warped the roof. One corner's collapsed, and you swear you saw a fox living inside. You shout before entering, just in case you're about to surprise him. He has teeth. You have a dull rake. Inside the barn, the air is surprisingly warm, thick with the scent of animals, damp straw, and centuries of earthy effort. You pat the cow on the nose. She grunts and swats her tail. The goat bleats in complaint. He's always been dramatic. The hay's damp, but you pile it anyway. Better that than nothing. You work until your arms ache and your nose drips and your knees tremble. You're not alone. 2 neighbors join you, sharing complaints and theories. One insists that this cold spell is the work of witches. They freeze our food and drink our luck, he says, deadly serious. You nod slowly and say, maybe they just hate stew. He doesn't laugh. Tough crowd. You head back home. Snowflakes drift gently now, soft and hypnotic. For a moment, it's almost beautiful, the way the trees stand like silent monks. the way smoke dances into the sky like some smoky prayer. Then your foot slips on a patch of ice and you almost die. Again. Romance over. That afternoon, there's a meeting in the village square. The reeve is speaking. His beard is as white as the frost and twice as brittle. He announces that the grain stores are lower than expected. Surprise? Not really. He's calling for volunteer rationers, which basically means people who won't cry too loudly while giving up half their barley. You don't volunteer. You can't afford the charity. Instead, you help mend a broken sled in the workshop. It's patched with rope, bent nails, and an old shoe sole. It'll have to carry firewood soon. You wonder how much longer the forest will share its branches without protest. Night falls early. Too early. It seems unfair, as if daylight has grown shy or tired of watching you suffer. Inside the cottage, everyone huddles close again. The fire cracks, sending occasional sparks upward like tiny fleeting stars. Someone tells a story to pass the time. It's about a man who survived a snowstorm by crawling into the belly of a dead ox. You all laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's horrifyingly plausible. Your uncle once suggested sleeping in the outhouse because it was warmer than sin. He wasn't wrong. You pull your blanket up to your chin. Your toes brush someone else's. No one moves. Everyone is just trying to survive another night. You shut your eyes and wait for morning. The days stretch like frozen taffy, slow, unyielding, and suspiciously sticky with dread. You wake up to the same pale breath of morning pressing against the wooden shutters, the same sighs from your mother as she rubs her hands near a fire that never quite wins. And the same stew, always, the same stew. You've eaten so much of it that your dreams have started to smell vaguely of boiled root vegetables. But today isn't just another day of goat minding and snow hauling. Today is wash day. Yes, that mythical nightmare where fabric meets ice and hands go on strike. The washtub sits outside the cottage like a cruel joke. It's made of wood and iron rings and is approximately colder than betrayal. You're tasked with scrubbing this week's collection of dirt-stiff linens, socks that could double as blunt weapons, and, your personal favorite, your father's underclothes, which seem to have absorbed something far more permanent than just labor. You begin with a rock, literally. You beat the fabrics against it, hoping to scare the grime into submission. It works somewhat. The water, of course, is melted snow, which is just a poetic way of saying your hands go numb before the third sock. Your fingertips turn waxy white. You start humming to distract yourself. Maybe a song about fire or vengeance. It's around this time that you start to wonder how anyone survived this century. Historians estimate that average life expectancy in these bitter times hovered around 30 to 40 years, assuming you weren't a noble or miraculously immune to dysentery. And that's just the lifespan. Quality of life? That's a debate that feels, well, mostly lost. You wring out the linens with the strength of someone who's already accepted their wrist pain as a lifelong companion. The sun, if it can be called that, glints through a thin sheet of cloud. The clothes freeze as you hang them, literally freeze, stiff as boards. You try not to laugh. Or cry. The sound would be the same. Inside again, your mother is trying to make tallow candles. It smells like regret and animal fat. You help by holding the string steady as she dips it into melted grease again and again, building up layers. You ask how many dips it takes to make one candle. She says, about as many as it takes to freeze your patience. By midday, the village is buzzing with mild panic. Word has spread that wolves were spotted near the edge of the woods. Again. You remember last year's incident, those eyes in the snow, like two glowing coals, watching. One of the hunters claimed he saw a pack running like shadows between trees, silent and swift. He also claimed the wolves spoke in Latin. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in talking beasts, or if that hunter was just off his ale. You sharpen the fence poles just in case. The goats stay close to the house. The chickens are unusually quiet, and that's never a good sign. You carry a stick now, just long enough to look brave, not quite long enough to be useful. Dinner is stale bread softened in broth. You savor it like cake. Your father, back from helping the blacksmith, has soot on his face and a look that says something broke again. Probably the forge bellows, or maybe his last nerve. The blacksmith's daughter flirts with him constantly, and your mother pretends not to notice. It's an awkward sort of love triangle, made even worse by the fact that nobody's had a bath in 3 weeks. Later, as the sun dips below the frozen hills, the sky flushes briefly with lavender and rose. It's the most color you've seen in weeks. You take a moment to just stand outside and breathe. It's so cold your lungs protest, but the beauty is worth it. For a second, everything feels quiet. Not dead, not dying, just paused. Then your little brother throws a snowball at your head. You chase him around the yard, laughing until your cheeks burn. It's a rare kind of joy, the kind that sneaks up on you like a warm breeze in the middle of a storm. You tackle him. You both tumble into the snowbank. Your mother yells not to crush the herbs she buried there for safekeeping. You apologize through fits of laughter. Inside again, the fire burns low. The candles flicker. Shadows dance on the walls like ghosts telling bedtime stories. Someone's making crude puppets out of straw again. Probably your sister. She gives them ridiculous names like Lord Crussell and Sir Mudbottom. You pretend you're too old for it, but secretly love when she makes them fight with squeaky voices. The room feels smaller at night, closer. Not in a suffocating way, but in a we've made it through another day kind of way. Someone coughs in the corner. You hope it's just the smoke. But you know how these things go. You lie down, curling into the shared warmth again. A storm is brewing outside. You can hear it in the wind's new language. Low, whispery, cruel. Tomorrow might be worse. But tonight you have a blanket, a body to lean against, and just enough warmth to dream. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. It's still dark when your eyes open. Not just early morning dark. This is the kind of darkness that feels older than time, like the sky has forgotten how to rise. The hearth fire has dimmed to a sleepy red sigh, and the cottage is quiet. Too quiet. You lie still for a moment, wondering if something's wrong or if this is just what pre-dawn silence sounds like in a world without clocks. You hear it then. A long, slow creak. Wood expanding, or something outside stepping where it shouldn't. You hold your breath. The goats shuffle. The chickens mutter. A low groan of wind wraps around the walls like a warning. You pull the blanket tighter, but the chill creeps in anyway. Your breath fogs in front of your face. You contemplate getting up to stir the fire, but there's a universal rule at play here. Whoever moves first sacrifices all residual warmth to the cold gods. And right now, you're not ready to make that offering. Eventually, your mother rises. She wraps herself in layers and kneels by the embers, coaxing them gently with a bundle of twigs and soft breath. Fire is not taken for granted here. It's as precious as gold and twice as fragile. Once there's a glow, movement begins. Groggy, reluctant, clumsy. Someone trips over a chamber pot. Someone else swears under their breath and gets smacked for it. Your sister manages to spill the grain sack. Again. You gather a few kernels, whispering apologies to the invisible spirits you're pretty sure live under the floorboards, just in case. Breakfast is cold porridge. Not chilled. Cold. The oats clump together in a way that defies both physics and decency. Still, you eat. Because food is survival, and survival isn't picky. Afterward, you're sent to the edge of the woods, not deep, just far enough to gather branches. Your father warns you not to go past the old stump that looks like a hunched man. He's been watching since before your time, he says, half joking, half serious. You nod like you understand. The snow here is soft and powdery, but underneath it lies a crunchy layer of ice that cracks underfoot. Birds flit overhead, silent and pale. You wonder if they dream of warmer skies. You spot a fox track, slim, elegant, recent. You follow it a bit, just because. Eventually, you reach the stump. It does look like a man. Or maybe a monk hunched in prayer. You nod respectfully and turn back. You're not one to test stories. On the way back, you find a patch of strange symbols carved into a tree. Runes, maybe. Or someone's attempt at marking territory. Historians still argue whether such carvings were protective spells or just bored teenagers with sharp rocks. Either way, you don't touch them. By the time you return, the wind has changed. It now carries snow, sharp, sideways like thousands of frozen needles. A storm is rolling in faster than expected. There's a flurry of movement, securing shutters, tying down livestock, stuffing wool into the gaps in the walls. You help patch the roof with bundled reeds. It's a treacherous job, made worse by the wind trying to steal your balance. You joke about flying away like a bird. Your father doesn't laugh. He once lost a cousin that way. No wings, just wind and bad footing. As the storm hits, you retreat inside. It sounds like the sky is falling. Snow pelts the thatch in waves, and the walls groan with every gust. You light every candle you have. The glow is small but comforting. You huddle around the fire. Even the chickens are inside now, roosting in a basket by the door like grumpy feathered squatters. This is when the stories begin. Your grandfather, when he still had all his teeth and most of his wit, used to say, "If you can't fight a storm, you better talk louder than it." So your father tells the tale of the Winter Man, an old spirit who rides the cold winds, dragging a sack of forgotten names. If he whispers yours, you vanish by morning, supposedly. You tell yourself it's just a story. Your sister follows up with her version of the Lady in the Frost, a pale woman who appears in snowdrifts and offers warm hands, but they burn like ice. Your brother tries to outdo her by making fart noises into a cup. You all laugh harder than the joke deserves. Anything to keep the cold out. You remember that time the old widow in the next village over claimed to have slept with a hedgehog under her blankets for warmth. She insisted it worked. You're tempted. You look at the family cat. The cat looks back with an expression that promises consequences. Eventually, the storm begins to pass. The wind quiets to a whisper. You peek out the shutter. Everything is buried. The fence, the well, even your favorite rock, the one shaped like a badger's nose, is just a bump in the whiteness. You sigh. Digging it all out will take days. Still, something shifts inside you. A strange sort of pride. You weathered the storm. You're still here. You're not warm, but you're not gone. And in this age, that's a victory. You crawl back to your sleeping spot, heart still thudding from the leftover adrenaline of imagined whispers in the dark. You think you hear someone walking on the roof, but it's probably just snow sliding. Probably. You drift off dreaming of hot soup, blazing sun, and a future where roofs don't leak and people have shoes with actual soles. But for now, you're just a kid curled against a flickering hearth, in a house full of stories, surrounded by snow, and somehow still smiling. By the next morning, it's clear. This isn't just snow, this is siege. The kind of deep, silent snow that makes roads disappear and turns houses into islands. The drifts reach higher than the windows. You push against the door, and it won't budge. For a moment, you imagine being snowed in for weeks, surviving on porridge, goat's milk, and the terrifying possibility of turning that one cousin into stew. Just a passing thought. Probably. Eventually, the adults dig a path out, shoveling with wooden spades and the occasional frying pan when tools run out. You're sent to help, but mostly you end up making snowballs and nearly blinding your brother. It's all fun and games until someone gets hit in the eye. Then it's just slightly fun with a side of moral guilt. Outside, the world has gone silent. Not just quiet, silent. Even the birds seem stunned. Trees sag under the weight of the snow like they've given up entirely. Your breath curls in front of you, then vanishes into nothingness, like a ghost too tired to haunt. But here's the truth of it. People can't sit still long, especially not medieval peasants. Even in snowstorms, the to-do list never ends. If the goats aren't milked, you don't drink. If the well freezes, you haul snow and melt it by the fire. If the food stores run low, you dig through your secret stash of buried root vegetables and hope the mice didn't get there first. Today, your father decides it's time for a trip to the market village. And guess what? You're going with him. He says you're old enough to learn the ways of the road. You're suspicious. That sounds like adult speak for carry the heavy stuff. So, you bundle up. Wool tunic, sheepskin cloak, 2 layers of socks, 1 inside out for good luck. You wrap your feet in strips of cloth, then stuff them into cracked leather shoes that were probably made during the reign of someone long forgotten. They're still better than the barefoot option. You set out, trudging behind your father. The snow crunches underfoot, each step like a soft thud in a cathedral. The trees creak in protest. Occasionally, you pass another traveler, equally bundled, equally miserable. One greets your father in a dialect you barely understand. Might be Flemish, might be curses. You cross a frozen stream, careful not to slip. The ice groans under you. Somewhere in the distance, a raven calls, and you instinctively spit over your left shoulder, just in case. Old superstitions stick, especially when you're walking over what could become your icy grave. A few hours in, your father decides to tell you about the frostbite legend, how fingers stolen by the cold are collected by a mischievous spirit who uses them to count his victims. He's joking. Maybe. Finally, the village comes into view. It's little more than a few cottages huddled around a thatch-roofed inn and a market square buried under snow. Smoke rises from chimneys like signs of life. You feel your toes again for the first time in hours. The market is half buried but still open. Sort of. A few vendors have cleared spaces to display withered apples, smoked fish, rough woven cloth, and mystery meat pies that probably contain more mystery than meat. Your father trades dried turnips for a pair of wool mittens and a slab of salt pork. You carry the goods, as suspected. There's a man telling fortunes with a wooden board and a set of oddly shaped bones. People crowd around him, seeking omens in the face of a winter that doesn't end. Historians still argue whether these fortune tellers were respected spiritual guides or just really good at making things up. Either way, it's entertainment. You catch bits of gossip. A monk frozen in the hills while searching for relics. A midwife who delivered twins during a blizzard using only candlelight and a prayer. A noble's hunting party lost for days, surviving on foxes and prayers. You store these tales like coins. They might be useful later, especially on nights when the fire burns low and silence presses in. Before leaving, you stop at the local healer's hut. A hunched woman with hands like tree bark gives your father a pouch of dried herbs. "For the lungs," she says. "You've heard about her. Some say she's part witch, part wise woman. Others whisper she once turned a man into a pig." You nod politely and back out slowly. On the way home, snow begins to fall again. Big flakes this time, soft and heavy. The world feels slower, muffled, like someone's wrapped everything in cotton. Your father hums an old tune. Something about the wind and bones. You try to match his steps, partly for warmth, partly for rhythm. As you near home, the sky shifts to indigo. Stars prick through like needles. You realize you haven't seen the sun in 3 days. Or is it 4? Time becomes a suggestion in this cold. Back inside, the warmth hits you like a hug. The hearth glows, stew simmers, and your siblings look at your market hall like you've returned from war. You proudly present the salt pork like it's treasure. Later, you sit by the fire, peeling frost-bitten layers from your feet and wondering how anyone survived winters like this before. No weather app, no alerts, just clouds and instinct. You remember the healer's face, wrinkled, stern, and maybe a little magical. You wonder how she learned to use roots and leaves to fight something as massive as winter. Maybe there's a lesson in that. Maybe power isn't loud. Your eyelids grow heavy. The fire crackles like distant laughter. Outside, the snow builds again, quietly, patiently, as if preparing for round 2. And you? You've made it home, warm and full, with all your fingers still attached. For now. The next few days roll on with the same slow rhythm, like walking through thick syrup. Every hour feels stretched by the cold, every task slightly heavier than usual. But humans are remarkable at adapting, even if it means turning daily survival into a grim sort of routine. You wake before the sun. Though let's be honest, the sun barely shows its face this time of year. You fumble in the dark, your breath already visible as you sit up. The straw mattress is stiff with frost creeping along the edges of the wall behind you. It's like sleeping in a giant meat locker, except you're the meat. Your job this morning is simple: collect firewood. But, as with all things during the great medieval freeze, nothing is ever just simple. The woodpile out back is frozen solid, buried under a crust of ice that might as well be iron. You chip away at it with a rusted axe and cold, numbed fingers. The blade bounces off a chunk of oak with a mocking thud, as if the wood is laughing at you. Eventually, after much grumbling and one accidental foot injury you pretend didn't happen, you manage to drag a few logs inside. Victory. The hearth is the heart of your home now, literally and spiritually. Without it, everyone would be icicles by noon. It's where meals are cooked, clothes are dried, and people gather in a huddle so tight it might be mistaken for a group hug that never ends. The trick is to rotate positions. Too close, and you risk burning your backside. Too far, and your teeth begin an unsolicited percussion solo. By mid-morning, you're weaving wool near the fire, making thread from sheep's wool that smells faintly of the outdoors, and regret. Your grandmother is spinning beside you, telling a story about the winter when the river froze so hard they held a market on top of it. People walked across the ice with carts and oxen. Even a bishop skated, she says, though historians still argue whether that bishop was real or a local embellishment. Either way, it's a good image. The cold doesn't stop trade, it just relocates it. In fact, winter markets become a thing. Pop-up fairs on frozen lakes and rivers, stalls wedged into snow tunnels, entertainers juggling torches with gloves on. You wonder who thought this was a good idea. Then you remember, people need to eat, people need to barter, and some people are just really bored. One merchant once traveled for 3 days with frozen ducks tied to his back like feathery armor. Another sold hot beer, which, if you've never tried, tastes like regret with a hint of cinnamon. People were creative. They had to be. The cold didn't care if you ran out of candles or beans or boots. It came for everyone equally. Later in the day, the local blacksmith stops by to warm his hands. He's a gruff man with a beard that's probably hiding a second face. He mentions his forge nearly went out, and if it weren't for a boy who fetched kindling in the dark, the whole village would have lost access to nails, hinges, and horseshoes. "Good lad," he says. Then he tosses a copper coin into your lap. You look at it like it's gold. Because, well, close enough. Dinner is a triumph of survivalist cuisine. Dried beans soaked in broth, wild garlic you swore was regular garlic, and a crust of bread that could double as a doorstop. You chew it anyway, because complaining gets you nothing but a smack from your older sister and a reminder that at least it's not moldy. As night falls, the wind picks up again. You can hear it scratching at the windows like a beggar trying to get in. Somewhere outside, a fox yowls, followed by a long, low creak of tree limbs bending under too much snow. You lie under a mountain of blankets, each one heavier than the last. The dog curls at your feet, radiating the kind of heat no fire can match. You wonder what it must be like for people without homes, or those stuck on the road tonight. Your grandmother once told you about a group of traveling musicians who got caught in a snowstorm and ended up spending the winter in a barn, playing sad songs for cows. You laughed, but she didn't. The cows liked it, she said. And then there's the fringe tale. A story about a wandering hermit who claimed the freeze wasn't natural, that it was a punishment from the sky for forgotten rituals. He wandered into town wearing bird bones and snowshoes made from deer antlers. People listened, mostly out of curiosity. He vanished after spring, but some still whisper his name during storms. You're not sure if it was madness or foresight, or maybe the two are closer than people think. You fall asleep thinking about that, about rituals and cows that appreciate music, and frozen markets on rivers that might never thaw again. Your toes are still cold, but your mind feels full of stories, of survival, of a strange kind of hope that refuses to freeze. And just before sleep takes you, you swear you hear the wind whisper something. It might just be your imagination. But then again, you live in a world where people sell beer on ice, goats wear sweaters, and some men walk around with duck armor. Anything is possible. You wake to the soft, rhythmic sound of something dripping. It takes a moment to place it, the ceiling beam, thawing slightly in the faint warmth of the hearth, releasing droplets onto the stone floor with a lazy plip, 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 a rare sign that the cold might be loosening its grip, even if just a little. You stretch, bones cracking like old timber, and pull the blanket closer for a moment longer, letting the dog reposition itself with a grumble of protest. Then, chores. Every day in the great medieval freeze begins with some version of manual labor. This morning's flavor? Latrine duty. Outside, in knee-deep snow. You sigh like a martyr and head out, boots crunching on frost-coated earth, each step a negotiation with gravity. The wooden outhouse squats in the distance like a forgotten relic, roof sagging under the weight of last night's snowfall. You try not to breathe through your nose as you approach. It's a brutal reality of the freeze. Nothing decomposes quickly. Waste freezes, food freezes. Even bad decisions seem preserved in this never-ending winter. And yet, somehow, you still live, still shovel, still return to the house afterward with cheeks so red they practically glow in the dark. Back inside, a flickering candle is doing its best to pretend it's the sun. The adults are already talking about rations again, salted meats, root vegetables, an alarming amount of turnips, and, because luck is clearly on your side, one dried eel that no one remembers storing. It's hard, like a wooden sword. You all agree to wait one more day before trying to eat it. Food, or the lack thereof, has become a kind of obsession. Everyone thinks about it, talks about it, dreams about it. You once had a vivid dream of a meat pie so detailed you could smell the gravy. Woke up biting your pillow. Hunger during the freeze is no joke. It creeps up slowly, disguised as boredom or tiredness. Then it becomes sharper, colder, a beast in the belly that growls in sync with the wolves outside. Famine isn't just something that happens to other people. It circles every family like a silent predator. Historians still argue whether the Great Famine that swept across Europe during the 14th century was a direct result of the freeze or a perfect storm of bad weather, failed crops, and terrible decisions, like planting grains too late or relying on that one guy with the bright idea to use saltfish as currency. And yet, even in this bleakness, people got clever. You remember watching your neighbor make a kind of stew using tree bark, herbs, and something she claimed was edible moss. It wasn't half bad if you ignored the texture. Another family traded their last wool blanket for a goose, only to discover it was already half frozen and possibly haunted. Still, protein is protein. A traveling monk once passed through your village and told stories of Icelanders fermenting shark meat underground for winter. "It smells like ammonia but keeps you alive," he said with a wink. You're not sure if that was a sales pitch or a warning. After your modest lunch, if 2 boiled carrots and a thimble of broth can be called that, you're sent to fetch water. The stream has frozen over again, of course, and breaking the ice becomes a full-body workout. You use a metal rod, then your boot heel, then your forehead in frustration. Eventually, the water beneath flows like a secret river, dark and cold, and somehow still alive. Carrying it back, you pass the church. The stone walls are rimmed in frost, and a single raven perches on the steeple like it's judging you. Inside, the priest is trying to convince people that the freeze is a test of faith. "Endure, and you will be rewarded," he says. You wonder if the reward includes central heating, because if not, you're not sure it's worth the paperwork. People pray differently now, less about salvation, more about soup. "Please let the bread rise," someone muttered last week. Another asked for thicker socks. One child prayed for a second chicken, because the first one is lonely. It's hard to argue with that kind of logic. And yet, there's something comforting in the rituals. The candlelight, the chants, the momentary warmth of a shared belief. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not divine intervention, but the way people cling together when everything else falls apart. Night comes early. Again. The sky turns a dull blue-gray, like an old bruise. You gather around the hearth, listening as someone reads from a worn book of saints. The stories feel familiar, even if the names don't. One tale tells of a holy man who survived 77 days in a snow-covered cave, with nothing but a flask of oil and divine patience. Your sister snorts. "Bet he still complained," she whispers. You both laugh quietly. Before bed, you help patch the roof with a bit of wax-soaked cloth. It's a temporary fix, but so is everything these days. You wonder how long this winter will last. Another month? Another year? There's talk of entire summers that never came. Crops that never ripened. Families who packed up and moved south, chasing the sun like it owed them money. As you crawl under the covers, dog already snoring by your feet, you can't help but feel proud. Somehow you're still here. Still breathing. Still laughing at eel jokes and saintly cavemen. And in a world where warmth is a luxury, laughter is practically currency. Outside, the wind starts again, but softer this time. Like it's humming. Maybe it's tired, too. Morning light oozes reluctantly through the shutters, the kind of pale glow that feels more like moonlight than anything to do with the sun. You squint up at the rafters, where frost has crept like ivy along the beams, clinging with icy fingers. The hearth has died to ashes overnight, and the dog, traitorous beast that it is, has burrowed deeper into the wool pile and refuses to share warmth. You stretch a hand out and immediately regret it. The air bites. You do your best to shake off the stiffness and brace yourself for another day of freezing survival. Only to remember, today is market day. Now, don't get too excited. Market is a generous term. In the depths of the great medieval freeze, it resembles less of a bustling bazaar and more of a struggling patchwork of hope, desperation, and questionable haggling skills. Still, it means a chance to barter, maybe overhear news from the next village over, maybe find something edible that isn't root-based. You wrap yourself in every layer you own, literally. There's a shirt under your tunic, then another tunic over the first tunic, then a cloak, 2 scarves, and what can only be described as wool socks on your hands. Fashion has completely surrendered to survival. You look like a disgruntled sheep, but you're warm-ish. The path to the village center is a snow trench, worn down by boots and sleds. The trees arch overhead like solemn witnesses, skeletal limbs etched against a blank sky. Occasionally, you pass someone going the other way, their eyes red-rimmed from wind and smoke, their greetings muffled under layers of wool. One man pulls a cart with what looks like dried apples and a half-frozen cat. No one asks questions anymore. You arrive at the square. A dozen or so stalls, or what passes for stalls, dot the open space. Tables covered in burlap, crates turned on their sides, wooden planks balanced between stones. A few vendors hover behind their goods, stamping feet, exhaling mist, hoping someone's desperate enough to buy 3 leeks for the price of a small inheritance. You approach with measured optimism. What you find is a living record of medieval cold-weather ingenuity. Someone selling candles made of animal fat and sawdust, fragrant in the most unfortunate way. Another has a stack of fish that are so frozen, they clink when they touch. A woman whispers about her secret stash of dried plums, stored in a carved-out brick inside her oven. You're not sure whether that's a euphemism or a business strategy, but you nod solemnly anyway. A man is offering boots made from cow stomach lining. Keeps out the wet, he boasts. Also the rats. You try not to think too hard about why those 2 features are related. You trade a carved spoon and 2 chunks of charcoal for a small pouch of millet. It's a deal you'd have scoffed at a year ago, but now it feels like winning the lottery. Grain means porridge, and porridge means warmth. Sort of. You also managed to get a sliver of beeswax and a cup of questionable honey by promising to help haul firewood for the priest later this week. Barter economy at its frostbitten finest. While circling the square, you catch wind of some gossip. Apparently, 2 villages over, someone has built a makeshift greenhouse using old glass panes and a lot of prayer. They've got lettuce growing, one man says, eyes wide with wonder, like he's describing a phoenix. Historians still argue whether these tales of midwinter cultivation were isolated miracles or early signs of a changing mindset, a willingness to push the boundaries of medieval agriculture. You also hear darker rumors. Wolves growing bolder, entire hamlets buried under snowdrifts, families vanishing into the white without a trace. A boy claims he saw a bear wearing a cloak, walking upright. He's either delusional, very imaginative, or possibly onto something we don't want to think too hard about. The cold does strange things to the mind. As you make your way back, millet tied snugly in your bundle, you stop by a small booth selling clay amulets. Protection from frost demons, the seller claims, grinning with only half a set of teeth. Crafted by monks. You buy one, not because you believe in frost demons necessarily, but because at this point, why not? If a chunk of clay hanging around your neck makes you feel 2% warmer, that's good math. Back home, you empty your haul onto the table like treasure. The millet, the honey, a withered apple someone threw in for free because it had personality. The family gathers around. Plans are made. The millet becomes a sticky, golden porridge over the fire, flavored with exactly one raisin. Everyone gets a spoonful and pretends it's the feast of Saint Benedict. You hang your frost demon amulet by the door, just in case. That evening, the wind shifts, and the snow begins again. Heavy, slow, like the sky is emptying its pockets. You sit by the fire, belly full of something that resembles food, and feel a flicker of contentment. The market didn't bring miracles, but it brought movement, interaction, a break in the monotony of winter's grip. A reminder that you're not the only one enduring, scraping by, laughing at absurd prices for cabbage. You sharpen a stick by the hearth, not for defense, but because it helps pass the time. Your sibling starts telling a story about a man who tried to use frozen goat droppings as dice. "They shattered," she says. "Game over." You laugh harder than you should. Life is still ridiculous, still stubborn, still cold, but still yours. The fire dwindles to a soft, sputtering glow, and you settle deeper into your chair, wrapped in every blanket within reach. Outside, the world has transformed into a vast, glittering tundra, the snow reflecting the weak moonlight like shards of broken glass. You breathe out and watch the steam curl upward, a brief plume of warmth in the frozen air. The cold isn't just outside, it's inside, creeping into bones and dreams alike. Tonight, survival feels like a quiet, delicate art. You remember the curious invention you read about in a dusty manuscript last winter? Something called a bed warmer. Imagine a metal pan filled with glowing coals that people would slide between their sheets to heat the bed before crawling in. Of course, you have no metal pans, no glowing coals, just frozen fingers and a mattress stuffed with straw. Still, the idea sparks a fleeting envy. Historians still argue whether these devices were widespread or rare luxuries reserved for the wealthy. In your world, they are nothing more than dreams. Sleep is an ordeal, more than a refuge. You have learned to curl tightly, like a seed waiting to sprout, to trap whatever heat your body can muster. At night, the cold plays tricks. Phantom drafts whisper along the walls, and every creak and groan of the timber house sounds like a warning. You pull the blankets higher, grateful for the warmth of another living creature sharing your space. Usually the dog, who begrudgingly accepts your presence, but demands his share of warmth. The great medieval freeze was not just a test of physical endurance. It reshaped how people thought about home and comfort. People began to cluster together for warmth, sleeping in communal rooms, sharing bodies and breaths to stave off hypothermia. The very notion of privacy gave way to practicality. Some villages even built communal sleeping halls, large timber structures with central hearths meant to radiate heat outward. You've heard about these from travelers, tales as much myth as fact, but they hint at the social adaptation necessary to endure this frozen nightmare. You shift position, remembering another peculiar survival tactic, wearing multiple layers of wool and linen, sometimes with fur linings where available. People would sleep fully clothed, sometimes even with their boots on. Not the most comfortable, but who's complaining when toes stay warm? In fact, many believed layering was so vital that they'd refuse to remove clothes even during the briefest moments indoors. Historians still debate whether this practice was a necessity born of extreme cold or a cultural shift toward valuing warmth over modesty. As your eyes grow heavy, you reflect on the strange things people did to preserve heat. Some filled their beds with dried herbs like lavender or mint, hoping the scent would soothe and maybe distract from the biting cold. Others fashioned rudimentary heat pockets, using heated stones wrapped in cloth, though these were risky and sometimes caused fires. You chuckle softly, imagining someone trying to sneak a hot stone under the blanket, only to leap up in a panic when it burns through the fabric. Medieval heating hacks. Some brilliant, some bunka medieval outside. The wind howls with the voice of winter itself. A deep, relentless moan that seems to seep through every crack and crevice. You pull your cloak tighter, whispering a silent plea for spring's eventual return. The cold is merciless, but you are stubborn. You close your eyes and let the slow drift of exhaustion carry you away, knowing that tomorrow will bring another battle against the frost. Sleep finally claims you. Not warmth, but a fragile surrender to the endless night. Dawn breaks with a muted glow, the kind of pale light that barely warms the frozen earth, but promises, somehow, that the long night has ended. You rise, joints stiff and fingers numb, ready to face the relentless cold once more. The fire's embers have nearly given up their fight, and the house smells faintly of smoke and damp wool, the scent of survival. Your day begins with the ritual of fire making, a task as vital as breathing. Without central heating, the hearth is your lifeline, your stubborn defiance against winter's grip. You gather whatever dry wood remains, a precious resource carefully hoarded, and strike flint against steel, coaxing sparks into life. It's a skill honed over years, yet every time you hold your breath, knowing a single misstep could mean hours in the cold. As the fire catches and crackles, you can't help but notice how central it is, not just for warmth, but for community. The hearth draws people together, a beacon amid the frozen desolation. Stories are shared, meals are cooked, and plans are whispered under the flickering light. Even in the bleakest winter, the fire offers a fragile hope, a small island of life amid the ice. You turn your attention to the food stores, another battleground of survival. With crops failing and livestock dwindling, every morsel counts. Root vegetables, carrots, turnips, parsnips, have become staples, often stored in cool cellars or buried under straw to prevent freezing. Yet, there's a quirky tradition you've heard about. Some villagers fermenting cabbage and other greens into sauerkraut to preserve nutrients through winter. The sour taste is an acquired one, but it's said to prevent scurvy, that scourge of long, dark winters. Historians still debate how common these practices were and whether medieval peasants truly understood their health benefits or simply followed inherited customs. You prepare a simple stew from dried beans and a few scraps of salted meat, simmering it low over the fire. The aroma fills the room, a small luxury in the cold, bleak days. As you eat, your mind drifts to the debates among scholars about the broader impact of the Great Freeze. Some argue it accelerated technological change, pushing communities toward innovations in agriculture, architecture, and social organization. Others claim it deepened feudal control, as scarcity forced peasants into tighter dependence on lords and church institutions. Outside, the snow continues to fall, a soft curtain muffling the sounds of the village. The cold has a way of isolating people, both physically and emotionally. Yet, within that isolation, bonds form: family, neighbors, the unspoken pact to endure. You think of the strange and unexpected ways people coped, knitting miniature woolen hats for chickens, building straw-insulated doghouses, or even carrying tiny braziers on market trips to warm their hands. Medieval life was a patchwork of necessity and invention, driven by the sheer will to survive. The day stretches on, and with it, the cold's unyielding presence. You stoke the fire again, readying the hearth for another long night. There's no central heating here, no thermostat to turn up when the chill bites. Just you, the fire, and the enduring human spirit refusing to be snuffed out. Evening arrives wrapped in a deeper, more unforgiving cold. You move through the dimly lit room, your breath fogging in the frigid air as you prepare for night. The fire's glow is weak but steadfast, a small rebellion against the creeping frost that tries to claim every surface. You think about the strange medieval innovations born from these harsh conditions, like the chimney pot design, which allowed smoke to escape more efficiently, reducing indoor smoke and making the hearth a safer, more effective heat source. The development of chimneys marked a turning point in heating, though historians still debate exactly how widespread their use was during the peak of the Great Freeze. Your thoughts drift to clothing, the armor against winter's assault. Layers are crucial: linen shirts beneath thick woolen tunics, cloaks lined with fur when possible. You remember reading about medieval people sometimes sleeping fully dressed, boots included, because undressing meant losing precious body heat. The idea might sound odd now, but when every degree counts, practicality trumps comfort. There's even a quirky rumor that some villagers kept their gloves on while sleeping, just to hold on to warmth. Historians still argue whether such habits were regional or a broader survival strategy during the coldest winters. The cold isn't just physical, it gnaws at the spirit. Long nights with little light and scarce food fostered a kind of quiet desperation. But people adapted, finding solace in rituals and stories. Candlelight flickered against stone walls as families huddled together, recounting legends of fire gods and winter spirits who either blessed or cursed their efforts. Some believed that carrying a piece of cold stone, a type of quartz, could absorb the chill. Strange, yes, but these beliefs were a patchwork of superstition and hope, keeping the mind warm when the body was not. Your stomach grumbles softly as you tend to the meager supper, a thick, smoky broth made from preserved meats and root vegetables. Food preservation was another cold weather challenge. Smoking, salting, and pickling became essential skills. You smile thinking about the odd medieval recipes, sometimes involving ingredients like crushed mustard seeds or even vinegar to extend shelf life. Historians still debate how much these methods impacted overall survival rates, but one thing is clear: no one could afford to waste a crumb. The night deepens, and you prepare your sleeping space. Straw-stuffed mattresses, heavy wool blankets, and the warmth of a shared bed are your defenses. You recall a fringe theory about medieval people using animal skins as primitive thermal blankets, though archaeological evidence is sparse. Historians still argue the extent of such practices, but it fits with the resourcefulness forced by relentless cold. As you lay down, you listen to the soft crackle of the fire and the muffled howl of the wind outside. The cold is a constant companion, but so is human resilience. You pull your blankets tighter and surrender to the quiet hum of survival, knowing that in this frozen world, every small comfort is a victory. You awaken to another dawn painted in shades of gray and white, the cold still gripping the landscape with an unforgiving hold. Your body aches from the night's struggle, but the fire must be rekindled. This morning, your mind lingers on the strange impact the great medieval freeze had on architecture. You recall how many homes, especially in colder northern regions, began incorporating thicker walls made from wattle and daub or stone, materials that could better insulate against the bitter cold. Some even added small, double-glazed windows, tiny panes of glass layered to trap heat, an early attempt at thermal insulation. Historians still argue whether these architectural advances were widespread or only accessible to wealthier households, but their legacy echoes into our modern building practices. You step outside, where the frost has painted everything in sparkling white. The village is quiet, but alive with activity. People bundle up to tend to the livestock, struggling to keep animals alive through brutal winters. You overhear an old tale about farmers insulating their chicken coops with hay and even giving hens tiny knitted sweaters, a quirky survival tactic that might sound whimsical today, but was born from genuine necessity. Whether these stories are accurate or charming folklore is still debated among scholars, but they paint a vivid picture of medieval resilience. Back inside, you turn your attention to the day's chores. Water is a precious commodity, often frozen solid. Medieval people devised clever ways to access liquid water, such as breaking the ice from wells at dawn or melting snow in pots heated by the fire. But did you know some even carried heated stones to melt snow in the field, avoiding the perilous journey back to the village? It's a fringe tidbit that some historians question, suggesting it might be exaggerated or isolated practice. But it highlights how survival demanded constant innovation. The cold dictated the rhythm of life. You notice how daily routines became more compressed, focused on tasks that could be completed before dark and frost deepened. Social gatherings were rare, and even church services were adapted to shorter durations, with medieval clergy often hurrying sermons to spare their congregations from prolonged exposure to the cold stone churches. Historians still argue about the extent to which the freeze influenced religious practices, but it's clear that winter shaped every aspect of medieval life. Your thoughts drift to clothing once again. The layering system was sophisticated. Linen next to skin, wool outerwear, and fur when available. You chuckle, remembering an odd fact about medieval gloves. Some had small slits sewn into the fingertips, allowing peasants to perform delicate tasks like threading needles without removing warmth. Giving layers. The practical meets the peculiar in these innovations born from necessity. As the day wears on, you reflect on how the cold spurred human ingenuity and cooperation. Villages shared resources, knowledge, and even body warmth. Survival was not just individual, but communal. The great medieval freeze was a harsh tutor, teaching lessons in endurance, adaptation, and the fragile balance between nature and human will. You stoke the fire again, preparing for another long night. The cold may be relentless, but so is your determination to endure. The morning chill bites sharper today, a reminder that the great medieval freeze shows no mercy. As you move through the day, your thoughts turn to the strange but fascinating medieval heating methods beyond the hearth. You've probably heard of bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals slid beneath thick blankets to stave off nighttime frostbite. Some wealthier households had elaborate brass or copper warmers, sometimes shaped like animals or decorated with intricate engravings. But did you know there's debate about whether common folk had access to these, or if it was purely a noble luxury? Historians still argue over how widespread these comforts really were during the coldest years. Outside, the village is buried under thick snow, and the roads have turned into slippery, icy trails. Travel is a dangerous gamble. You recall hearing about snowshoes, or primitive crampons fashioned from wood and leather, which helped villagers navigate the frozen landscape. These adaptations were essential for hunters, traders, or messengers trying to keep supply lines open. Yet, some experts question how often such gear was used, or if it was limited to certain regions. Still, the idea of medieval snowshoes adds a curious twist to the image of our frosty ancestors. Back inside, you focus on food once more. The freeze had a brutal effect on agriculture. Fields lay fallow, crops failed, and famine stalked the land. But medieval people turned to preserved foods like dried fish, salted meats, and root vegetables stored deep underground. There's a quirky tidbit about ice cellars. deep pits dug below the frost line, packed with straw and ice to keep perishables chilled, but not frozen solid. It's a primitive form of refrigeration that few imagine existed back then. Historians still debate how common ice cellars were, but their mention in some records hints at an early understanding of temperature control. The church, a central pillar of medieval life, responded to the crisis in unexpected ways. Beyond spiritual support, monasteries often became centers for food storage and distribution, offering aid to starving villagers. You might be surprised to learn that some monasteries maintained vast herb gardens indoors, heated by cleverly designed greenhouses called hothouses that used sunlight and trapped warmth to grow medicinal plants during winter. This horticultural innovation was quite advanced for its time, though historians still discuss the extent and effectiveness of such efforts. As dusk falls, the cold presses in again, and you prepare for another night of layered clothes and straw mattresses. The flicker of the firelight casts long shadows, and you find comfort in the warmth that survives despite everything. You chuckle at the thought that medieval people probably wished for central heating as much as you do now, but without the luxury, they invented countless workarounds, mixing ingenuity with a stubborn refusal to surrender to the cold. Tonight, as the wind howls outside, you feel connected across centuries to those who endured and invented, all striving to survive the great medieval freeze. The frost thickens, and the village settles into the steady hum of survival. Your mind wanders to the social side of enduring endless winter. With daylight scarce, evenings were long, quiet, and often lonely, but not without distraction. You recall hearing about nightly gatherings, where villagers exchanged stories, sang songs, or played simple games by firelight. Some nobles hosted small feasts inside their halls, not just for pleasure, but to maintain morale. Historians still argue whether these social rituals were widespread or mostly confined to wealthier classes, but their presence hints at the human need for connection amid hardship. One quirky tidbit you come across is the use of warming stones, flat rocks heated by the fire and passed around to share warmth by hand. It might sound primitive, but it was a clever communal way to battle cold fingers in rooms where the hearth's reach was limited. The idea is oddly charming, and some scholars debate whether warming stones were more symbolic or practical in medieval households. As you trace your fingers over the rough wooden table, you consider how clothing styles evolved in response to the cold. The traditional woolen garments were sometimes enhanced with patches of animal fur sewn inside collars or cuffs. You smile, remembering that some peasants used to stuff their shoes with straw or moss for insulation, fashion and function in a rough balance. Historians still debate how much regional variation influenced these clothing adaptations, but the evidence suggests creativity was key. Food scarcity forced changes to diet, too. You recall medieval recipes that might sound strange today, like pottage, a thick, stew-like dish simmered for hours, combining whatever vegetables and scraps were available. Sometimes odd additives like nettles or acorns appeared to bulk up the meal. This humble dish was a staple during harsh winters, but its role is still debated among food historians as either sustenance or survival fallback. Your thoughts turn to the hearth, the heart of every home. You remember the strange practice of hearth stones, special flat stones placed directly around or inside fireplaces, believed to radiate heat longer after the fire died down. Whether this was genuine physics or superstition is a matter historians continue to discuss, but the practice itself was widespread enough to leave traces in surviving medieval homes. As night draws close, you prepare your bed once more, layering blankets and settling in with a weary sigh. The cold is relentless, but so is your human spirit. Finding comfort in warmth, stories, and shared history, even when the world outside freezes over. The cold morning air presses in again, sharp and unyielding, and you're reminded just how deeply the great medieval freeze reshaped daily life. Beyond survival, it influenced trade networks and economies in ways you might not expect. As local crops failed, villages increasingly depended on imported goods, especially salt, vital for preserving food in freezing conditions. Salt caravans became lifelines, but the harsh weather made travel perilous. Some merchants resorted to traveling at night when the ice was firmer, a risky gamble that occasionally ended in disaster. Historians still argue whether this nocturnal trading was common practice or isolated daring ventures, but the tales persist in medieval records. You think about the curious cold inns scattered along trade routes, rudimentary shelters where weary travelers could rest, warmed by small fires, but never fully escaping the chill. These inns were often little more than barns converted for human use, with hay-stuffed walls and rough wooden benches. It's a quirky image. Merchants wrapped in threadbare cloaks, huddling together for warmth, sipping watered-down ale to stave off frostbite. Some scholars debate if these inns actually offered significant warmth, or if they were more symbolic stopping points marked on maps. Back in the village, you notice the increasing importance of blacksmiths and craftsmen during these times. Not just for weapons or tools, but for crafting practical winter gear. Iron stoves, thick iron grates for hearths, even crude snow cleats hammered from scrap metal. It's an era of improvisation and adaptation, and the smithy hums with purpose. Historians still discuss how rapidly these technologies spread, especially to rural areas versus urban centers, but there's no denying their role in winter survival. A quirky medieval superstition comes to mind. Some believed that wearing iron jewelry or amulets could protect against cold and disease, not just evil spirits. Whether this belief influenced actual health or was placebo remains unclear, but it adds a fascinating cultural layer to the freeze's impact. As you settle down by the fire tonight, the smell of burning wood and iron mingling in the air, you reflect on how the great medieval freeze wasn't just a season. It was a crucible. It forged innovations, challenged beliefs, and tested the limits of human endurance, all under a relentless, frozen sky. The relentless grip of winter tightens, and your thoughts drift toward the mental toll this endless cold inflicted on medieval communities. Isolation was a heavy companion, villages cut off by snow, neighbors unable to visit, the usual hum of social life muffled beneath layers of ice and silence. You imagine how the dark, cold months stretched endlessly, breeding both superstition and resilience. It's no surprise that tales of witches and spirits surged during these times as communities sought explanations for their suffering. Historians still argue whether these heightened fears were directly linked to climatic stress or just coincidental social patterns, but the freeze certainly fed the flames of medieval folklore. Among the quirky tidbits is the practice of cold divination, a fringe ritual where villagers would read patterns in cracked ice or frozen ponds to predict the coming year's weather and harvest. Whether this was a genuine form of meteorology or purely superstition is debated, but it underscores how intimately tied their lives were to the frozen environment. You chuckle at the thought of medieval weather forecasting relying on icy poetry rather than satellites. You consider the spiritual role of monasteries, which doubled as places of refuge and knowledge during the freeze. Beyond prayer, monks copied ancient manuscripts on herbal remedies and weather lore, preserving wisdom that might have otherwise been lost. Some scholars still debate how much of this knowledge was practical versus symbolic. But these efforts formed a vital link between past and future generations. Food scarcity and hunger shaped community bonds as well. The harsh winters often forced sharing of limited resources, and records show villages pooling grain stores or organizing communal hunts when game was scarce. You find it fascinating that some villages adopted rotating fasting schedules, not just for religious reasons, but to manage scarce food supplies. Whether this was a widespread coping mechanism or a regional practice is still under discussion among historians. The cold also changed how people moved and communicated. Letters and messages traveled slower, often delayed by snowstorms, forcing reliance on word of mouth or trusted messengers. You picture medieval couriers braving frozen forests and icy rivers, their determination a lifeline for distant relatives and authorities alike. As night falls and frost creeps along the window panes, you wrap yourself tighter in your blankets. The Great Medieval Freeze was more than a meteorological event. It was a profound human experience of isolation, ingenuity, and survival. The icy grip of winter never truly lets go, and you feel it in your bones as the days remain short and gray. You start thinking about how the freeze affected the medieval calendar and daily routines. With daylight hours cut dramatically, people adjusted their schedules, often rising later and sleeping earlier to conserve energy and avoid the bitter cold. Markets operated on irregular schedules, and festivals shifted to accommodate the harsh conditions. Historians still debate whether this seasonal rhythm significantly altered medieval productivity or simply added to the fatigue of the times. A fascinating detail is the use of rushlights, thin rush plants soaked in animal fat and burned as cheap candles. These flickering flames provided just enough light to see by, casting eerie shadows on stone walls. They were a staple in poorer households, and their smoky, dim glow became synonymous with winter evenings. Scholars argue about how effective rushlights really were compared to other lighting methods, but they undeniably shaped the atmosphere of medieval nights. Your mind wanders to hygiene, something tricky during frozen months. Bathing was rare, partly because of cold water and partly due to beliefs linking water to illness in winter. Instead, people relied on dry cleaning methods like rubbing with cloths or herbs. There's an amusing medieval belief that wearing smelly clothes actually protected you from catching cold or plague, a notion historians still view with skepticism, but find fascinating. You can't help but imagine the mingled scents in a typical medieval village during the freeze. Smoke, damp wool, and those herb sachets tucked into pockets. Heating homes was an ongoing challenge. You remember that not all medieval houses had chimneys. Many cottages had open hearths in the center of the room, which meant smoke filled the space and sometimes caused irritation. The invention and spread of chimneys was a slow process, with some historians arguing that widespread chimney use didn't occur until well after the freeze, influencing indoor air quality and warmth. As you settle in for the night, the dance of shadows and cold whispers remind you how much life was shaped by these elemental forces. The Great Medieval Freeze wasn't just a season of weather, it was a season that rewrote the very rhythms of human existence. The relentless chill starts to shape the very architecture of villages, and you can almost see the frost-bitten outlines of homes adapting to survive. Timber framing became more intricate, with walls thickened using wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks, clay, and straw, offering insulation against the biting cold. Some wealthier homes added double walls with straw packed in between, an early attempt at thermal buffering. Historians still argue whether these insulation techniques were widespread or mostly limited to affluent households, but the evidence shows a clear trend toward battling cold through structure. One quirky adaptation you find intriguing is the curtain wall inside medieval homes. Heavy fabric hung around beds or in doorways to trap warmth. Think of it as a medieval version of a space heater, but made from velvet or wool. Some historians debate whether these curtains were primarily for warmth or privacy, but either way, they hint at the human desire to carve out cozy niches amid harsh conditions. You also recall the widespread use of the smoke hood, a crude predecessor to the chimney, designed to funnel smoke out of homes. Its efficiency was limited, often resulting in smoky rooms, but it was an important step toward improving indoor air. Scholars continue to debate the timeline of chimney technology adoption across Europe, with some arguing it was accelerated by the needs of colder winters. The freeze also altered construction schedules. Building or repairing homes had to be carefully planned for warmer months, as the ground froze solid, making digging and foundation work nearly impossible. This seasonal constraint impacted not just homes, but infrastructure like mills and bridges, which were vital for village economies. You picture villagers huddled in their drafty homes, relying on every innovation and tradition to hold the cold at bay. The Great Medieval Freeze shaped not only the way they lived day to day, but also how they built the very spaces they called home. As the frost begins its slow retreat, you can almost feel the thaw seeping into the earth, signaling an end to the harshest trials of the Great Medieval Freeze. Yet, its legacy lingers, etched in every stone, every hearth, every whispered legend passed down through generations. This was a time when survival demanded not just strength, but cunning, adaptability, and a stubborn hope that spring would return. You recall how the freeze challenged not only the physical body, but the medieval spirit. Communities learned to band together, sharing warmth and resources, their stories intertwining with the cold like threads in a tapestry. The debate among historians about the precise climatic causes and societal impacts continues, but the resilience remains undisputed. The quirky details, the rushlights flickering in the smoky rooms, the iron amulets warding off chill and evil, the cold divinations by cracked ice, paint a vivid picture of life lived close to nature's harsh extremes. These fragments of human creativity and belief show that even in the darkest, coldest times, people sought meaning and comfort. You drift to the idea of how this freeze might echo in your own experience. Maybe it's that one long, unbearable winter when you felt isolated, or a moment when resilience was your only option. The Great Medieval Freeze reminds us that survival is never passive. It's an active, living dance with the elements and with each other. Now, as you prepare to rest, you can let the icy winds fade into distant memory, replaced by the warmth of your own safe space. The past's cold lessons whisper gently, urging patience and endurance. Sleep now, knowing you've journeyed through a frozen world and emerged wiser for it. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cold that once ruled so fiercely now softens into a distant echo, a fading frost that melts beneath the promise of dawn. You feel your breath slow, your muscles relax, and the quiet rhythm of your heart steadying like a gentle drum. Outside, the world continues turning, but here, in this cocoon of warmth and calm, you are safe. Imagine yourself wrapped in a soft cloak, the chill slipping away as you sink deeper into comfort. The heavy silence of frozen nights gives way to a peaceful hush, the kind that fills your dreams with quiet stories and gentle light. There is nothing more to fear in the cold now, only the serene embrace of rest. Let your mind drift softly, carried on the slow tide of night, knowing that every frost, every hardship has passed. You have traveled through time and temperature, touched by the resilience of those who came before. Now, all that remains is peace. Good night and sweet dreams.